Right, we are standing down for answers. They recognizing the 11 o'clock on the dot. You can now see. Thank you. I think there was a very good segue into the next item 8.2, representation review. Janice.
I will talk to you as soon as I have a microphone.
Oh.
That's not someone sending me a message. I don't know what is. My family would love it if it was as easy as that to silence me. Kia ora koutou, good morning. Through you, Mr Mayor, along with Sarah and Andrea, we bring forward this paper today seeking your adoption of the final proposal for the 2021 representation review. As you are aware, the final proposal that is included in this paper reflects the feedback that or the steer that you gave us as we helped you work through the consultation feedback that you had received on your initial proposal and your consideration of options for whether or not to make any changes to the proposal on the basis of the feedback that you had received. You have had the benefit of the analysis carried out by Empathy Design of the submissions and technical advice from both Emma and Dale Ofsosky, and Dale is with us on Zoom today to answer any questions that you might have as you consider this final proposal. I believe we've had a number of conversations with you, so I don't intend to go through the specific details of the proposal, but the team is here to answer any questions that you may have.
Right, questions? None. Councillor Cook.
I was waiting for someone else to go first, but I want to hog the microphone. I'm aware that we've got Dale with us on via Zoom.
Yeah.
So a question for Dale, if you're there, Dale, and listening. Sorry, two questions. One is, we've heard certainly today, but I would say not just today, that the comments around the process being a shambles. If I recall in a briefing from you back to elected members, you had said that the process that the council had conducted was very thorough, and I think if I recall correctly, you may have or almost referred to it as being regarded as best practice, or sort of certainly up there in terms of the length and breadth that we went to go to. Would you mind just explaining, I guess, your thoughts on that in terms of the process that the council has undertaken? But before you do so, also maybe just help elected members and listeners understand your experience in terms of how many elections you've been involved in, or processes you've been involved to qualify your view. I don't expect you to cite the specific number, because I imagine it is vast.
And we don't want to be here all day.
I have a follow-up question.
Thank you for that opportunity. I've been an electoral officer now for about 35 years, so I'm quite experienced in undertaking elections and representation reviews. I've been undertaking or assisting councils with their representation reviews now for probably about 15 or 16 years. So I'm quite familiar with the legislative requirements and the Local Government Commission's guidelines of what is required from a local authority that undertakes a review. So I do have a little bit of experience in that, and we're currently assisting about 10 councils in this round of their representation reviews. So it is quite extensive, particularly a number of those councils, of course, are establishing Māori wards, so that's why they've had to undertake their reviews. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, the process, in my view, and I think I used this phrase earlier, has been good and robust. Why I say that is that I think the way Council has undertaken this has been great. Starting with the preliminary consultation, that's not a legal requirement, so Council has undertaken that voluntarily just to gauge that feedback from the public initially before they launch into their decision on their initial proposal. So I think right through the process, Council has broadened their view. They've looked at a number of options to come to their initial proposal. They've gone quite a different model with the initial proposal that went out for public consultation. We got a good number of submissions received back from that. Council's analysed those and, more importantly, I think listened to those submissions and then is prepared to amend its initial proposal in light of those submissions. So in my view, anyway, I think the whole process has been run extremely well.
Thank you. That's very helpful. It comes to my next question. There was comments around the suggestion that we put forward around a subdivided community board for Paraparaumu Raumati. The specific question was around, or I guess the comment was around objections being lodged because this was not in our initial proposal and neither was it in specific submission. So do you have any concerns around the council should it progress that option today being invalid?
No, I don't, because when I read the legislation, and I prepared for that one, for this, is that the Territorial Authority must consider all submissions received and may make such amendments to the resolution as it thinks fit. So I think they are the key words in the legislation, as it sees fit. Now, we did get submissions around that issue, and Council has amended its initial proposal to reflect the submission, possibly not the same concept that was considered, and that was a separate, that was submitted on, being a separate community board, but Council certainly has reflected that submission by subdividing that community board. Don't forget also that there is a further round of formal consultation still to come. So if there are any amendments to the initial proposal, then the final proposal is open for objection and appeal. So the public has another opportunity, another 4-week or 1-month opportunity to lodge an objection to this.
Thank you, Dale. My last question to you, and then I might take a break and let other councillors, Your Worship, is around the status quo. So there has been a large feedback within the submissions around retaining the status quo. Council obviously had advice right throughout the process that the status quo was not an option due to the previous advice from the Commission. It would be helpful, and I'm asking the question of you rather than staff, because I think there's a perceived bias out there that the perception that the staff have bias. In terms of your independent view, what would have happened if we had ignored that advice and just gone out with the rep review with the status quo and then put that back to the Local Government Commission? I guess the question is why couldn't we have, I was trying to think of the way to frame it, but why couldn't we have gone out with just the status quo?
Well, you could have. You probably would have been commented on or reprimanded, if you like, by the Local Government Commission as to the process. Why wasn't a full process undertaken rather than just taking the easy route of adopting the status quo? And then it'll end up with the Commission to make the decision anyway. I think there would be criticism on the Council as to, there is a process set out in legislation, there's a process set out in the guidelines. Why didn't Council undertake that process? And the answer, of course, is that Council did undertake that process. And did come up with something different with the initial proposal, listened to the public, and has amended that initial proposal to reflect that feedback.
Thank you. If I could just elaborate further on that and then I'll finish. is it fair to say that because we've tested that, we're in a stronger position to argue for the status quo in the Local Government Commission to potentially support that than if we didn't and then just went there and they could have potentially overturned it?
That's correct. I can't speak on behalf of the Local Government Commission, but certainly the evidence is there when you troll through the process that was undertaken. It's been quite extensive and quite thorough, and that all assists the Local Government Commission. It will go to the Commission because of it's outside the plus or minus 10%, so that's automatic. But certainly the information undertaken previously and the whole process will directly benefit the Commission in their making a determination.
Thank you very much, Dale. And Your Worship, if you would allow me, I'll come back in later.
Councillor Henford.
Yeah, kia ora. I also have a couple of questions through the Chair to Dale. Just wondering if a ward councillor can be appointed to two boards. So, for example, if there was a proposal to set up a separate Raumati Community Board, whether the Pakikiriki Raumati ward councillor could be appointed back to both the Pakikiriki Community Board and also the Raumati Community Board. And I've got another question following that.
I believe you can. The requirement for a appointed member to a community board is that appointed member must be a councillor from the ward in which the community board is situated. So if you have two community boards within one ward, then yes, the ward councillor can be appointed to both.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And one other question, kind of in the same vein, I guess, but if, say, there was just to kind of, I guess, foreshadow maybe where this is going, if there, say, was an amendment made to discuss the potential for establishing a Raumati Community Board, could we also choose to not appoint a councillor to this board and then, say, in the next triennium it could potentially be recommended that it was someone's portfolio, I guess, so not formally appointing, but instead allowing it to be someone's portfolio?
The legislation, from memory, and I can just double check this, is that a community board must consist of at least 4 elected members and may consist of an appointed member. So, but I will double check that. I'm pretty sure it's a may rather than a must. So yes, you do not have to appoint a councillor to a community board.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. A couple of questions from me. The first one's for Dale, and it's picking up a point that Councillor Cootes was talking about, and that was about what the Commission might say in terms of sticking with the suggested status quo. And Dale, were you aware that back in 2015 that one of the reasons why the Commission was comfortable with the status quo and the underrepresentation in Waikanae was because the Waikanae Community Board then supported that status quo, whereas that's not the case now in terms of their submission. They were quite opposed to the status quo and were in favour of a small wards model instead. So was something like that going to have an impact, given that was a specific point raised by the Commission last time, and now I guess the players have changed and their perspective on the suitability of that status quo has changed?
Yes, as I said earlier, I can't speak on behalf of the Commission, and also they will look at all the material that is provided to them, and we are required to provide all material, including all the submissions, copies of the submissions. So they will take all of that into consideration when they make their determination. They'll look back at their previous determination, they'll look back at the research that has been undertaken, the submissions, and the process that Council followed. And the thought process, and they will take all that into consideration and then make their decision, which may be upholding the final proposal or amending it. It's entirely in their cause.
Cool, thank you. My second question's, I'm not sure who's going to pick it up, but there's been a bit of commentary throughout this process around how we opted for this internal process rather than an external one, and comments around how that's impacted on how this has played out. But presumably if we had this community panel that run this externally, they still would have required that same support in terms of design research undertaken by Empathy, having support from Dale and staff in terms of developing options and all that. They still would have needed all that same support that we got in terms of the information. That those parts of the process would still largely be the same. So then it's a question of how much they would have listened to the community versus councillors listening to the community, isn't it?
Janice.
I definitely would agree that they would have needed technical support from council staff and from somebody like Dale. Whether or not, if there was a community panel at play, we would have gone down an sort of design research driven engagement and research phase to start with, or whether we would have used more of a sort of traditional or pure engagement method. It would be speculatory for me to offer an opinion on that because we hadn't actually had that conversation. So, but the panel definitely would have required support from the organisation and technical experts to be able to do its job.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So Dale, I've got, I think you're the best person to answer these questions. So my first question relates to the consultation document that went out. So you said that it was good and robust, but I just wanted to ask you if you have any concerns on, I suppose, the way it was laid out. So the way it was laid out, if you look on page, I don't know whether you've got a copy of the document in front of you, page 11, item 13, it actually takes a person, and also this happened for councillors, going through deciding on the number of councillors first, basically the breakup or the ratio of those councillors. And to me, and that was done without any explanation of the effects of those in terms of being able to meet the plus or minus 10% of those of the various wards. So people have actually made a decision thinking, yeah, you know, this sounds about right, but they haven't actually really understood what the implications are for in terms of changing the ratio to such a way which is clearly possible to get a much fairer representation of for each of the wards. So do you have any concerns over that?
As I said right at the beginning of the process, I think that there are three considerations legally that we must look at, and what are your communities of interest? So that's your highest priority, if you like. So you identify your communities of interest, and then you look at how you effectively represent those communities of interest. So that's your number of councillors by wards, a number of wards by community boards at large, those sorts of things. And then the last one is your fair representation. So that's your plus or minus 10% rule. That's your lowest in the pecking order of those three. So if you establish the first two, and then you land on your third one, and there is an ability to go outside of that third rule or that third criteria of the plus or minus 10%. So if you go outside the plus or minus 10%, you have to have a reason for that, and that reason could be that you're effectively splitting communities of interest, which brings you back to the first priority, if you like, of what council should be looking at, and that is, what are their communities of interest, and then you filter down from that. Does that answer your question?
To a certain degree, but I have a subsequent question to that too. So I think the proposal that did meet the plus or minus 10% that is not part of this paper today, well actually it's talked about, it's not actually the decision that's going to be based on today, is splitting the Waikanae ward to more of a town area and a beach area that went all the way up to up to Te Toro. To me, having a beach community and a rural area, to me that actually is deemed as a community of interest. Could you make some comments on that, please?
Well, unfortunately, a community of interest is not defined, so it can mean different things to different people, but it's basically where one identifies with or one associates with. Where do you send your kids to school? Where do you shop? All that sort of thing. So you identify your communities of interest, but these can be actually grouped together. So you can have a number of similar communities of interest as like one large community of interest. What you can't really have is quite different communities of interest that are grouped together. I think the Commission would have something to say about that. But certainly, if you're looking at identifying where someone identifies with, where they live, shop, play, and all that sort of thing, then that's your community of interest.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple more questions in relation to if this the decisions are actually agreed to today, and that's more about what happens next, because this will be going to the Commission for them to make a decision. So on point 75, it says that if individuals are going to make an appeal, it goes to KCDC, and I'm just wondering why it goes to them rather than directly to the Commission.
If I could explain that. So the final part of the formal process is the objection appeal period if the initial proposal is amended. So we have to do that. Even though we know that it's going to the Commission, the process or the law still requires us to undertake the objection appeal period of not less than 1 month. So we have to do that anyway. If we go outside the plus or minus 10%, which we may do, that's treated as an appeal. So, and then all appeals and objections are referred to the Commission. So Council still has to receive any objections or appeals and forward those on to the Commission. And because it's outside the plus or minus 10%, that is in itself is treated as an appeal.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the appeal process, is there any cost to ratepayers?
My understanding is no, other than facilitating the receiving of any objections or appeals. So Council acts as a receiver of those, and then it doesn't have to analyse them or anything like that, although some councils do, because the councillors are interested in what the summary of the appeals and objections are. But basically it acts as a receiver, and then just forwards any objections or appeals onto the Commission, along with all the background information, which can be quite extensive.
So in terms of, so obviously KCDC will be receiving any appeals that occur. Are they in a position to then make comment on those appeals, the subject matter of those appeals, or basically they just are a repository for receiving them and then forwarding them on to the Commission?
Yeah, the only opportunity Council has going forward is if the Local Government Commission choose to have a physical hearing, which they may or may not do. Then there is an opportunity basically for Council through the Mayor and Chief Executive just to do a brief summary to the Commission or the Commissioners prior to the at the hearing, and then it's over to the Commission as to how they conduct it, whether they call on objectors or submitters or whatever. It's entirely their call.
Okay, thank you. So my other question relates to page 27, that sets out the number of members that Council will be voting on for the various community boards. So it's very apparent that Waikanae Community Board potentially is going to be underrepresented, but it still has only 4 community board members, where that is the minimum number of members. So in a situation like this, is it actually perfectly valid and feasible to have more members of a community board when there is potentially only one ward councillor?
It's entirely a council decision. You can have between 4 and 12, so you could have 4 or 6 or 8 or whatever council so determines. You can also have more appointed members if you wanted to. You can have up to half of the elected members as appointed members. So if you retained 4 elected members, you could actually have 2 appointed positions being council positions. Or if you went to 6, for example, elected members, you could have 3 appointed members.
So with the appointed council members, so that process, maybe I need to look into how that works, but that is that's from members at large, is it, of the community at large, rather than members?
No, there must be ward councillors. The Act is quite specific.
So if there's only one ward councillor, there can only be one ward councillor ever?
Correct, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Perhaps this is a question for Janice. Is that okay? Is this the right time? Thank you, Janice. My question is about the 22,000 odd funding for grants for the Paraparaumarama Community Board. That's funded through a targeted rate. So would this proposed representational review change line up with our rates, normal annual rates review? Because I suspect that there's going to be some changes to our rating system for this to add another targeted rate for Raumeti residents.
So any financial implications that come from the decisions you make or the LGC makes around the representation review would need to be worked into our budgets, and we would do that via an annual plan or LTP process depending on timing.
Chief Executive.
Specifically, yes, if you choose that option. So if you want to create a rating area that matches the electoral area, that will be an amendment. It will be an annual plan conversation. You'll have to go and consult with the community on setting that up and having a targeted rate for them. So it adds a little bit of complexity to the process and another new rate. But that will be your choice. Should this go ahead along those lines, we'd give you the choice of continuing to just collect it from the larger catchment that is Parapara Umu Raumeti, for example, or to create a separate rating area.
Councillor Halliday.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, just actually a bit of clarity on a question for you, Eastdale. In regards to the current situation with 5 district-wide and 5 local councillors, with the Waikanae situation, if there was a Waikanae elected councillor outside of the Waikanae election process, if you like, with regards to the ward councillor, so in other words, they were a district-wide councillor, could they be appointed back to the Waikanae Community Board?
No, it must be a councillor for the for the particular ward. So it must be, for the Waikanae Community Board, it must be the Waikanae councillor.
Yes, I appreciate that, but could a second one, if they lived in the Waikanae ward, be appointed back as well?
I believe not.
Why?
Because that second one would be an at-large councillor.
Right. No other questions? Councillor Coates.
Sorry, I was just trying to make sure that other councillors had an opportunity. In the paper under page 18, it refers to point 46 around a Māori ward. So depending on the decision today, if, for example, there was a decision for a subdivided community board as opposed to a separate Raumeti Community Board, could a Raumeti Community Board be included if there was a review? So appreciating that a review must be done every 6 years but could be done earlier, if there was a desire for a Māori ward in the next triennium, you could therefore consider, after we've had time to work with the other boards, the addition of a Raumeti Community Board then, is that correct?
If you establish...
Just about the Māori ward?
Yeah, if you establish Māori wards, then a full representation review must be undertaken. So that is what it means. The whole thing is up for review again. So you could look at the whole process as we've just done this year in 3 years' time. So you could start from scratch. You could look at your number of wards. You could look at your... Because things will change with a Māori ward anyway with the numbers. If you remove the Māori electoral population, then things will change. So you have to review your general wards and you can review your community boards at the same time as well.
Yeah, thanks, that's awesome. The next question I've got is around the additional funding and support that was mentioned through the consultation document. We also received submissions from people, and it's probably more for Janice, stating that, you know, keep the community boards but use that money to support them. Do you want to just, it might be helpful to explain where that funding would have come from, and if we retained the community boards, which obviously the paper today is recommending, what that means if that level of support and even further support for an additional community board comes from?
Certainly. As we noted during the conversations around your initial proposal, were there no community boards that would have created space within budgets that could have funded some of those activities? With the retention of community boards, any work that you as councillors gave us direction to consider around addressing the concerns that have come out of this broader research program. We would need to look at whether that could be accommodated within existing budgets, and if it couldn't, and I can tell you not all of it would be able to be, we would need to bring a request via the annual plan process for you to consider.
So anything additional, whether it be for councillors or community boards over and above what's already been provided for, will be an annual plan consideration and will have a rate imposed on it, unless it's within existing.
Yes, would have a rate imposed on it if there were no other savings identified to offset it.
Thank you.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I have another question for you, Dale. Previously there has been a little bit of conversation around whether or not councillors need to consider potential growth when making this decision. Can you please make comment about whether or not that can be considered, or whether we're only able to consider I think it's the previous census figures?
The general advice is that we cannot project into the future because we simply don't know what the future is. The second answer to that is that legislation provides for that by allowing a council to undertake a review every 3 years rather than waiting the 6 years in case there are areas of significant growth. The third thing that is a tool that we could use is that plus or minus 10% rule, that we could go, closer to sort of minus 10% to allow for growth in certain areas if we were able to do so. So that's like a tool, if you like. But certainly the answer primarily is we cannot account for future growth simply because we don't know what it is, and things can change. And we can certainly undertake a review in 3 years rather than 6 years if desired.
So I suppose when you're looking at Waikanae, so obviously it's potentially going to be underrepresented by 25%, but there are two major developments at minimum that are already planned for Waikanae, which are going to increase the population substantially. So they are going to happen. So is that a tool that can be used to consider?
Not currently, because they're in the pipeline, so they haven't happened yet. We have to use the latest population estimates, which for this process was 2020, so they won't be reflected in those figures. They will be in 3 years' time if council has the further opportunity to do a review. So that's the opportunity that we'd say, hang about, we've now got another 5,000 people, or whatever the figure is, into that particular ward. That will change things quite significantly. If you do another review and you are establishing a Māori ward, then of course the Māori electoral population comes off it as another factor that we have to take into consideration, which may impact.
Thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. Dale, thank you very much for joining us. Just got a couple of questions, and I'm just wondering if you could provide some guidance here. With the Waikanae Community Board and their submission, they're obviously wanting greater what they call representation for their community, but at the same time later in the submission, I don't have it in front of me, but from memory, they then argue that they don't want the boundary change, which would increase would make their representation numbers better. How will a review looking at that type of conflicted situation, how will that play out? Because they're arguing for the cake and eating it too.
Again, it would be over to the Commission to digest both comments and just make a call on it. And they've got a good, vast experience right across the country, so they will look at the pros and cons of each situation and look at the submissions and whether each individual submission conflicts or not, and then they'll just make a respective call.
Thank you. In something that I'm not particularly au fait with, which is the Remuneration Authority, we've had suggestions that there's going to be a call to actually create a new Raumati Community Board, and it's not something that we've given direction to staff for. So if we're going from 4 board members to 8 board members, how does the Remuneration Authority look at that remuneration package and work out what's the basis for it? Because it will, one assumes, make a significant difference to their remuneration. And we've heard from councillors like Bernie Randall that there are issues with getting enough quality people. So I'm just wondering how that all plays out in your head.
The councillors are funded under a package by the Remuneration Authority, but my understanding is that community board members are not. They're outside of that. So that would be funded by probably a targeted rate. But Janice may be able to elaborate better.
Mr Mayor, can you hear me? Point of order. I object to what Councillor McCann said, and I asked him to withdraw that statement. I did not, unless he can provide written evidence at this meeting that I said what he said.
So you're saying you didn't say that?
I'm saying I did not say that, and I want some evidence from him before you allow him to have that entered.
I'm happy to withdraw and apologise, Bernie, and I'll rephrase it. There was a discussion within one of our workshops, whether it came from you or not, we'll just leave that to one side, that there could be some issues getting numbers of quality representatives on the community board, and adding another community board added significant pressure to that. And I'm wondering, when in looking for some advice, and I think staff were just about to provide that, when the remuneration may be reduced, and that's what I'm asking, will that possibly impact on getting that quality representation?
Mr Mayor, further to what Councillor McCann said about briefings, will the Chief Executive agree to release all copies of recorded briefings of the 4 briefings we had for the public?
Okay, look, all I wanted to, you have stated a question, a reference to yourself. Councillor McCann has withdrawn that and rephrased that. We'll leave it at that. Thank you. You now, as Ms. Dale, I don't think you're finished. Or was it Janice?
I had finished from my perspective, and perhaps Janice is better qualified to carry on.
Janice.
I might need to ask Councillor McCann just to remind me what his question was. I got a bit distracted here.
Can I hopefully cut to the chase? It is that external body that will determine remuneration. The factors that they use, whilst I don't know exact factors or formulae that they use, I think we can be fairly comfortably assume that one of the base factors is population. I think that there's an open question that we've expressed many times about whether simply adding more governance members changes the size of the job for our district. And the starting point that we would suggest to you is it hasn't changed the size of the job, therefore the existing amount of money that has currently gone to, for example, Parapara Umu Raumati, is quite likely to now be split. Whether it's purely on a population basis as a starting point, there are other factors that influence it in terms of the work. Place and population.
Base.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a base salary and then there's a population derived.
So in simple terms, in my opinion, whatever the current amount of money going to Parapara Umu Raumati is, if the population's about 1/3, 2/3, you'll probably see the pool split that way. In simple terms, oversimplifying.
Currently, my understanding is it's around about 10,138 for members, and then that would have to be split based on the population. So there would be a significant decrease in remuneration for the Parapara Umu board members.
Oh, look, we have taken a look at the Remuneration Authority's website and the basis and the formulas that they use, and I don't want to speculate on what that would be, but population as a factor would result in a decrease. I don't want to say whether it would be significant or not. That's for the Rem Authority to consider.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the Chair, just picking up on Councillor McCann's point there, is it true that the Paekakariki Community Board is paid a tiny amount of money, but they are actually considered one of our most well-functioning community boards. So sort of discussions about what pay might be appropriate or required to attract candidates doesn't necessarily correlate to what you're going to get. It could be more to do with the actual focus of the community board and the community it's serving and its engagement with
Chief Executive.
the community board.
All I'd respond with is they have certainly described themselves as well-functioning. And they're quite entitled to say so. They do not follow standing orders. They do not follow our prescribed processes in law, but they operate the board meetings and they have a jolly good korero with their community and they get results. So well-functioning, not in a traditional community board sense, but in terms of outcomes and results, I think they're very happy with how they get on.
Right. No other questions? Any other questions? Last call. I understand there may be amendments made. This is a very fraught process, and as chair, I'm very conscious that this is a legal process. We have the knowledge that this will go before the Local Government Commission, and also the amendments may have knock-on effects, I don't know, to some of the other recommendations, and I want to be careful how I approach this. So what I'm going to do, take an unusual step, but it has been taken before, I know, is to adjourn this meeting and go into workshop mode to discuss what it is, and then we'll come back. So so that gives you space to see what's in front of us and manage this in a congenial way, and we'll come back.
Mr. Mayor, I've got a question.
Councillor McCann.
Mr. Mayor, that sounds like a really good suggestion. Is it going to be a public workshop so that there can't be accusations of horse trading, which I have heard from the community from time to time?
I will take advice on that.
I'm sorry, I was dealing with another question. What are you seeking my advice on?
So technically it can't because it wasn't advertised. We can't have an open public workshop and give everyone the opportunity to attend. My suggestion to the Mayor to enable a decent korero around this issue and get everything out on the table and have it. Horse trading, I think, is not a fair term, but allow people to thoroughly work through the issues of the various considerations. I suggested that when we reconvene the council meeting, we would make sure that debate is aired once we're back in the council meeting. So in other words, not necessarily 100% of the to and fro, but the essence of what's been debated so that it is held publicly.
Yep, Councillor McCann.
Would it not be possible then just to suspend standing orders so that we could have a free and frank discussion and remain televised to millions of people, but effectively just to ensure
that is one of the options that was suggested at the standing orders workshop that I attended. But the idea is to whether we are comfortable to have that conversation. So you've got two options. Anybody else? Councillor Albro.
In my view, we've had a conversation in a public workshop for about 3 hours about these very matters. We've given a steer. We have a paper in front of us, and I would prefer to take the recommendations and debate them and vote on them. I think we have to be very careful about what constitutes an amendment. You can't amend a motion to mean something different to what it is. So I just foreshadow that I have a bit of a concern about some of the amendments I'm hearing kind of floating around.
That's precisely why I want the space to have that discussion. So you've got two choices here. We amend and go, adjourn and go into workshop and then come back again, or we suspend standing orders still and then have the discussion, pre-discussion.
I'm happy to move 3.5, temporary suspension of standing orders.
Okay. I'll second that. So we will, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Again.
Aye.
Carried. So the standing orders is now suspended, but we will proceed as we are. So we now can we look at the possibility of what the amendments are? Councillor Enfield.
So I've sent some amendments through to Tanika, so hopefully those can be pulled up on the screen shortly. Have you got those, Tanika? Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to foreshadow that staff have identified an error in recommendation 96.3.5, and at the appropriate time we'll table an amendment.
Which one is that, 96?
It refers to a Paikākariki Raumati Community Board, which of course doesn't exist, and it should just be a Paikākariki Community Board.
I have amended that in the amendments as well, so so that would be covered. Yep.
I think, Mr Mayor, it would be helpful if we could take a very short adjournment to enable staff to prepare material of what sounds like some fairly a reasonable number of amendments.
Yep, so how many minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Cool.
Can I have 24 hours and 5 minutes?
How about a trip to Rarotonga?
I reckon it's good.